Welcome back to Rewind of the Living Dead. I am Damon. I officially hate trailers, Martin.
And I am welcome to the club, Patrick Guerra.
Boy, I tell you what. So tonight, Patrick, as we talked about in the intro, we tonight are reviewing what's becoming a very popular film, a new little horror thriller comedy called Companion.
Companion, released in January of 2025, starring Rupert Friend as Sergey, Harvey Guillen as Eli, Megan Surrey as Kat, Lucas Gage as Patrick, Jack Quaid as Josh, and Sophie Thatcher as Iris. As you mentioned, Damon, written and directed by Drew Hancock, with a producer by the name of Zach Kreger, which some people might recognize as the director and writer of Barbarian, which was a breakout hit from a few years ago. And I'm going to be honest with you, Damon, when I heard that it was like the producers of Barbarian, you know how I feel. I was like, great. Okay, we'll see where this goes. And then, Damon, as you kind of quickly mentioned there in your intro, you don't like trailers no more, right? So what did I do? I avoided trailers entirely for this movie, Companion. I said, I'm not even going to bother with them. Now I do sit in the theater with my phone on silent as I look through it while trailers play, because I don't want to deal with trailers giving up anymore. Abigail was the last straw where I was like, this is a blatant giveaway of what this movie could be and how exciting this could be. So I sat down for Companion already with a little bit of that, like, what do the people who made Barbarian think is going to be a good follow-up? Well, it turns out, Damon, Companion's a damn fine follow-up that, in my opinion, surpasses Barbarian on all levels and is actually kick-ass. But it does have a problem, doesn't it? Now, that's the problem that I didn't experience because I didn't watch trailers. You did, Damon. You want to tell people what happened with the trailers for Companion?
So let me start by saying the first trailer, the teaser trailer, which I think you did see. I think you did see
I always watch a teaser because they are just teasers, so they don't tell you.
The teaser trailer was fine. It was perfect. I watched, I was like, this is interesting and weird. It was kind of being presented as a love story, but it was also, they had that scene at the end where Jack Quaid's character is sitting at one end of the table. You got Sophie Thatcher and her hands over the fire and it's catching fire, and she's handcuffed to the chair. You're like, what is going on here? That's it. That's all they told you. Nothing else. There was literally nothing else in that trailer. Yeah. And that was just such a good mystery of like, what is this? And again, as you said, from the people who made, from the twisted minds of Barbarian, they said also made The Notebook, which was a great teaser. Like, okay, so it's like there's a romantic movie, but it's also a horror movie. Like, what's going on here? Perfect. It was the perfect teaser, and it got me genuinely excited for this film. Because I love that kind of like, I really don't know what I'm watching, and also B, I like the cast. I love Jack Quaid. I've been a fan of his for a lot of years from The Boys and everything else he does, and I'm a massive fan. Go back and listen to our Heretic episode. I love Sophie Thatcher as well. She's one of my favorite young actors working in Hollywood today. So I was in. I was already in. But then I went to the theater. I don't know what it was. Like, something we reviewed in the last month or so. I don't remember exactly which film it was. It may have been when I saw The Damned Without You, which that movie, if you go read my review on rewindoflivingdead.com, I did not enjoy it. And that theater is also where I got COVID for the second time. So fuck that movie. But it may have been when I saw The Damned. It may have been the week after that. Because again, we've had kind of a busy January, and which is not, usual. And I sat down, and there was a new trailer for Companion. Now, at the time, it starts out kind of the same. So I thought, oh, it's the same trailer. But it's not the same trailer. It is a trailer that reveals a huge part of the twist of this movie. And I got like visibly angry in the theater watching this trailer. And I was like, what are you doing? Because if you go back and listen to our Abigail episode, that wasn't a terrible movie. But they ruined so much of it with the trailer that it kind of made it a terrible movie. Because if you watch the Abigail trailer, and the movie's over a year now, so I don't think I'm really spoiling anything. It's in the trailer. It's about a ballerina.
The trailer spoils the movie.
But the problem with Abigail was it literally just told you the entire movie in the trailer. Everything. There was literally no surprise left. And I sat down in the theater and I was like, you just ruined this for me. That would have been a great twist. Not to rehash that podcast, but we said, like, if you had not shown that, and we saw that actually happen in the movie, it would have been a nice surprise. But you ruined it. You completely ruined it in the trailer. Now, I will say, the companion trailer, while it does give away something pretty major, and I would imagine probably 85% of our audience has probably seen the trailer I'm talking about, so you probably know, even though I'm not mentioning it. The reason I'm not mentioning it is for that 15% out there that have avoided it and they haven't seen this movie yet. I want you to go in blind. So I'm warning you ahead of time, our non-spoiler section tonight is going to be pretty short because we want to get into spoilers so we can talk about the big twists and the turns in this movie. But if you haven't seen that trailer, avoid it like the plague. Go see this movie. Now, the trailer gives away one big part of this movie. I will say, though, unlike Abigail, it doesn't give everything away. So, like, while there is one little thing, you're like, hold on, you just told me something that I didn't know. They didn't go all that far. So I'll give credit where credit's due. They didn't go all the way down the Abigail road where they literally just gave you the entire movie. But still, you gave me more than I needed to know, more than I wanted to know, and it just made me so angry because I didn't pull the Patrick trick. I didn't just put my head down to read my phone. I saw it, and I left the theater, and I was like, fuck these people, man. You just gave me something, because that first teaser was so perfect. And yeah, so it just gives away a twist. Again, it doesn't ruin it, but you just watched it for the first time before we recorded tonight. And you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, at the behest of our great leader Damon Martin, I was implored to watch the trailer for Companion before we did the podcast, and I was shocked to learn that it exposed one of the huge portions of this movie that to me, I'm just like, look, horror and thrillers and kind of genre adjacent stuff, I think that they rely on you being surprised and shocked and thrilled by what you see on the screen. Don't tell me, because I'm someone who edits stuff for a living, don't tell me that you don't have a way around this. I know you do. I know you have a way around it. In fact, the very trailer that you had me watch only needed to omit a couple of little things for it to be completely spoiler free in the respect of like not knowing all the big twists and turns that were going to happen in this movie. I don't know why companies do this, why they insist on giving away big portions of the movie in trailers. I do think it's because they quote unquote test well. And what I mean by that is they're not really talking to people about these trailers that give everything away. They're just going, people seem to like that. So we're going to stop. We're not going to mess with the formula. Never realizing that maybe they could actually have a longer shelf life if they don't give away what a movie's about. I think with Abigail, and to go back to that, you definitely could have cut a movie trailer around the big secrets of Abigail, and you would have at least created a surprise for somebody like myself. I didn't enjoy that movie, but I kind of had a feeling I wouldn't anyway. It just wasn't my style of movie. Same thing here in Companion. I did enjoy this movie, and I will say this in our pre-spoiler section. I think most people are going to enjoy this movie regardless of whether they see the trailers or not, because this is a very good movie. I'm telling you right now, it's one of my favorite movies I've seen this year so far. So if I can get you excited and go into the theater and go watch it, I highly encourage you to. I also highly encourage you to pause at our spoiler section and come back after you've seen the movie. Really experience this shit because it's so much fun. What Drew Hancock and company have done have created a fun, twisty, turny, thrilly, bloody, just interesting movie. And that's kind of all I want to say about it because I don't want to give away the things that I think are important about hiding in this movie.
And also hilarious because it's actually a comedy too.
Yeah, it's very
funny parts. I will say this, like we are in the day, and I'm not justifying it. I think we are just in that day and age now where you said where people just want to know everything. And I'll give you another example. This past week, some huge news broke, very relevant to our show, revolving around Scream 7. They announced that Scott Foley, who played Roman Bridger, the killer in Scream 3, and the big news, Matthew Lillard, Stu Macher himself, was returning for Scream 7. Now, I see a lot of comments from people like, why wouldn't you let that be a surprise? Like, that would be like every Scream fan would lose their minds to see that. Like, that would be amazing. That's like when you went and saw the Avengers, if you were a comic book fan and you stayed for the post-credit scene and you saw Thanos. And I was a big, as I've mentioned on the show before, I have the freaking Infinity Gauntlet tattooed on me. I am a big Thanos fan. I remember seeing that in the theater. I was like, oh my God, it's Thanos. They're doing it. They're doing the Infinity Gauntlet. It was so cool. Now, how pissed would I have been had I known that was in there before I saw the movie? But I think you're right. We are in an age. I'm not justifying it, Patrick. I'm just saying, like, we are in an age now where movie theaters are still struggling coming out of the pandemic. It's been very well known. Movies don't, and Quentin Tarantino, my hero, did a big Q&A about this recently. I think it was around Sundance with Elvis Mitchell, the journalist, and he was talking about, like, what the fuck is a movie anymore? Like, it goes to theater for like 2 weeks and then it's available online. He's like, that's not a movie experience. Like, he loves the theater. Like, I know you don't love Tarantino, but you love his opinion on the theater experience. Like, he is all about the theater.
Yeah, you got to have it.
And he's like, even in like the 90s, like, theatrical runs were like 8 to 10 weeks. Now a theatrical runs like 2 weeks and it's gone, like, out of the theater. And it's gotten to the point for Tarantino where he's almost like, I don't know when I'm going to release my final film because I don't want that experience. I don't want my film to go into theaters and people are like, I don't need to see it. It'll just be on demand in 4 weeks. It ruined, he doesn't like, and I get it. We always preach the theater experience on the show. So I imagine what the studios are doing and researching and learning is that the more people know, the more apt they are to go see something in the theater. They're like, oh, well, I know it's a werewolf movie, or if I know it's a vampire story, if I know it's a whatever story, they're more apt to go into the theater than if you just tease and don't give them anything. There's got to be some market research that says that. So I am just like with the Matthew Lillard thing, like, okay, are more people going to go see Scream 7 if they know Matthew Lillard is already in it, or if they don't know? There's got to be some research out there, or they were worried about it leaking, so they just did it anyhow. But there's got to be something where, like, they know, if people know this person is in the movie, they'll go see it. There's got to be some sort of research to this to prove that. So that's my guess. That's my assumption. But man, I love a good surprise. And again, to Companion's point, as you said, it doesn't ruin the movie. The trailer that's out there doesn't ruin the movie. Unlike Abigail, that ruined the movie.
Yes, it does.
This doesn't ruin the movie, but it's still just that one thing, as you said, they could have cut around it. It's like a little 3-second thing. They could have literally just cut around that 3 seconds, and it would have been basically just a bit more footage than we saw in the original teaser, which I loved. The original teaser was great. It was a perfect tease to be like, I don't quite know what this is, but I know I want to see it. So yeah, I'm not justifying it. Actually, again, I'll continue to rebel against it, and now I'm going to become a clone of Patrick Guerra in the theater. I'm just going to put my head down and watch my phone while the trailers are showing because I don't want to see anything. I used to love trailers. I used to love the previews. It's ruined now. They've ruined it.
Yeah, they really have. I think to your point too, I think a lot of people these days have a lot of options with regards to entertainment these days. And so I'm sure research shows that a lot of people just want to know what they're getting into, which to that I say, God damn it, come on, knock it off, people. They're giving you what you want, and so really I'm just blaming all of you out there. That's what you want, isn't it? You want to know everything you could possibly know about a movie before you go to see it. I happen to like to be surprised, and I was surprised, Damon, and I think it made for a great experience for me because I did see a lot of people afterwards talking about the movie and how much they loved it and enjoyed it. They just wish the trailer hadn't spoiled so much for them. I didn't have that problem. I just got to go in and go, holy shit, that was such a fun ride. Imagine like not having any of those expectations, not knowing what I was getting into, not knowing what twists were coming, and then just seeing it and being like, oh shit, this is cool. Oh, that's happening too. Oh, that's happening. Wow. Oh, and I'm laughing and I'm having a good time and it's just a fun, good movie. Like, I don't know. I think I just had a better experience. So I advocate for that. It will fall on deaf ears for the most part. I doubt we're reaching that many listeners, but join the cult of Patrick. Trust me when I tell you, it's good here. It makes movie watching more fun here until somebody figures out how to really tease trailers properly. I think Hard Eyes, which I think we're talking about next week, if I'm not mistaken, they have done a great job of just sort of giving you the basics of that movie. They're not like oversharing anything. And I did happen to see the second trailer for Hard Eyes, and I was like, yeah, it looks like a cool and fun slasher. Like you're having a good time on Valentine's Day. That's kind of all I needed to know about it, and that's all that's there. And I think that's all they're going to give us. Works for me.
Yeah. And before we get real quick, before we get to spoilers, let me say, to just reiterate what your point is, I really love this movie. This movie was surprising in so many different ways. It was fun, it was brutal, it was well acted, it was well written, it was funny. I didn't really know it was a comedy going into it. That's the one element I didn't truly know. Like I thought there may have been some tongue in cheek humor, but it was actually a really funny movie. That's why I said it's a horror comedy. It's not just a horror film. It's not just a thriller. It is 100% meant to be funny. And as I said in my intro, if you're watching this on YouTube, you don't hear it, but I said that like Drew Hancock was a comedy writer. If you look at his IMDb page, it's all sitcoms up until Companion. Like he did nothing but sitcoms. So he's a comedy writer, and so it's funny. It's legitimately, there were a couple laugh out loud moments in this movie where I literally burst out cracking up laughing in this movie. It's a great movie. And again, we're in January this episode's coming out in February. We're basically through the January slate of films. I know it's a very small sample size, but this is one of my favorites of the year so far. Now, will that hold up by December? I have no idea. But I can tell you right now, through January, of everything I've seen so far, this is at the top of the list. This was so much fun, so original, well acted, well written. So yeah, I love it. So I guess at this point, we pretty much have to get into spoilers.
I think it's time.
Very early in the show, which is, we typically try to give you a little bit more, but I'm telling you, go see this film blind. Not like don't watch it, but like go in blind. Don't go in knowing as little as possible and just enjoy the theater experience of watching this. There's very often, I'm not going to sit here and tell you everyone's going to agree with us, because I know people don't always agree with us, good or bad. But this is one time where you and I tend to agree in saying, go see this. This is a really fun movie, and we imagine the majority of our audience is going to enjoy it.
Oh, yeah. I definitely think they will.
So with that being said, Patrick, let's get into spoilers. So if you haven't seen Companion, stop now. Come back. We'll be here. We're not going anywhere. Go see it.
Be all right.
Watch it. Come back and listen to the rest of the show, because we are going to get into full spoilers, and this is where it all goes down. So with that being said, Patrick, should I go through the plot of the movie first, then we'll get into the full review?
By all means, Damon.
So the plot of the movie is this. At the beginning of the movie, we meet a young couple named Josh and Iris, played by Jack Quaid and Sophie Thatcher. And they are going to a cabin in the middle of nowhere to hang out with some of their friends for the weekend. In the cabin, we meet Patrick and Eli. They are a couple. And then we meet Kat and her weird kind of older Russian boyfriend named Sergey. And right away we learn that Iris is very, very like timid around Josh's friends, because she's just convinced most of them don't like her. And so she's doing everything she can to get closer to Kat and just kind of like befriend them. And, it's just a typical, friend weekend. They're partying, they're drinking, they're dancing, they're having a good old time. And then the next morning, Iris goes out to, sunbathe by the lake, and she runs into Sergey, who, again, is an older Russian guy and, a little creepy. And he starts kind of putting the moves on her. He's like, hey, I know this is okay. You want this. And she's like, no, like, get away from me. And she has a pocket knife in her pocket, which we're all, again, very curious, like, why does she have a pocket knife? And when she finds it in her pocket originally, she's like, this is strange. I don't remember putting this here. But then Sergey jumps on her, and she defends herself by stabbing Sergey in the neck with the knife, and she kills Sergey. She walks back into the house, and she says something bad happened, or whatever. And the rest of the team is like, "Oh my God, what happened?" And then Josh goes over and says, "Iris, go to sleep." And we discover that Iris is a robot. She is a cyborg. She is a synthetic human, if you will be a Bishop fan from Aliens. A synthetic person. And we find out that she is a robot. And we learn to find out that in this day and age, wherever it is, we never know the exact time, Josh has basically purchased Iris to be his girlfriend. And it's just what you would imagine an AI love bot would be. It's trained to adore him, treat him like gold. He's the best thing that's ever happened to her. And it's just like a real relationship, except she is ultimately a robot, and he controls her by a little control pad on his phone. We learn later on in the movie that Patrick, played by Lucas Gage, he is also a robot. And we're like the twist in that, we're like, oh my God, he's a robot too. So we learn the whole plot of this movie is that Josh and Kat scheme together to kill Sergey and rob him, because in his safe at his house, he has like $12 million in cash. And Kat has repeatedly told Josh that Sergey is a bad guy. He's like a Russian mobster. And she's like, we're going to rob this guy and take his money, but he's obviously got to be dead or he's going to come after us. And so they kill Sergey, and the whole plan is to take his $12 million. And then at that point, their friend Eli finds out what they're up to. So he has to be brought in on the plan. And that's when we find out that his boyfriend, Patrick, is also a robot. But during all this mayhem, and I'm not going to get to the ending yet, but during all this mayhem, Iris wakes up and she kind of kicks into like self-survival mode, even though she's really being controlled by Josh. And that's when the shit really hits the fan, because Iris realizes she's a robot and she's trying to get away from the people who are more or less, I mean, they're trying to kill her, disassemble her, whatever you want to say. And they're trying to blame the crime on a killer robot. That's the whole plot of this movie. They're trying to rob Sergey and blame it on a robot who's gone haywire. The AI went bad. It went Terminator, and it killed Sergey. That's the whole plan, the whole plot. And as you can imagine, it doesn't go well, and shit hits the fan.
It doesn't go well because while Josh kind of reveals to Iris what she is, because and that's something you learn really quickly, is you learn that the AI persons, or these artificial persons, they are programmed to believe that they had a love moment. They're actually literally programmed to be like, oh, we met in their case, we met in the grocery store and he spilled a bunch of oranges trying to hit on me and he was so endearing and sweet and everything. So I saw that in him and I just immediately became in love with him. So she has kind of like basically the plot details of their relationship burned into her brain. So she has to kind of unlearn this, and he helps her unlearn it by just explaining to her, like, you know, you have to understand what you are and what happened to you so you can stop freaking out about why you're tied up. Also, you killed this guy, so now you're an issue. So she gets that information and very wisely goes into self preservation mode for a moment while he's looking the other way. The important plot detail is she gets a hold of his phone, the phone that actually controls her. And so she's able to do things like up her intelligence, up her strength, up her ability to reason, self-defense, all this good stuff. So it actually makes her more formidable against the humans that have plotted to just scapegoat her with killing this guy. What that ultimately entails is like a very funny and fun discourse on toxic relationships. I think it's a very strong theme in this film. And B, sort of, well, what happens when you give people this kind of power? What happens when you give people the power to control another human? You know, in this case, yes, we're talking about AI humans, but, you know, Iris sees herself as human as could be. She doesn't see herself as artificial. So she's feeling terribly manipulated. She's feeling lied to. These are the kind of things that any normal person in a relationship would have felt. You know, if you accidentally, you know, or not accidentally, if you plotted to have your girlfriend kill somebody, she's going to feel the same way Iris feels. It actually doesn't matter that Iris is an AI robot. All the same relationship complications apply here. But on the flip side, the human side, Josh, you know, he sees her as an object. He sees her as something to serve him purely. He doesn't have the love for her that she has for him. He doesn't appreciate what he actually purchased her for, which is for companionship and for the ability for someone to love him. She does his bidding. And in this case, she was supposed to do his bidding. He actually hijacked her, not hijacked, he like hacked her system to allow her to do these things because they actually have a fail-safe in there that they're not allowed to harm humans. Well, Josh went and screwed with that. What happens when you screw with the protocols? What happens when you screw with the regulations? Damon, something wrong happens. You don't take those things away for a reason, so you don't have situations that happen like this. And of course, why did that person take away those regulations? To do something abusive and illegal and totally wrong. And it turned out Kat was bullshitting about Sergey in the first place. He was kind of a shitty boyfriend, and she was actually his side piece. He's like married and stuff. But at the end of the day, he was just a guy who was into sod. His family was just into selling manure. That's all. He wasn't some gangster or anything like that. He was just a guy who was trying to make his living. And she didn't like him very much, and she wanted to steal his money. So it turned out that the humans in this situation were the shitty people, and the AI robots, well, they were just sort of like awakened, like, oh my God, like, why would humans use me like this? I was like, this is that weird side story of the Matrix. Do you know when they had those Animatrix movies? I was like, this is another Animatrix movie.
It's funny because, yeah, one of the funniest moments in the movie is when she tells Josh that Sergey isn't actually a gangster. She's like, he's a sod farmer, and he goes, he sells dirt. It's just really like the way there's a reaction. So yeah, like the humans are the shitty ones in this, and again, this is set up in a way to make you feel sympathetic for the robots because they're just being abused. You know, like, and again, yes, they are objects. You did know they are not human, but they are, you know, one thing that Iris says in the movie at one point is she's like, I feel pain. Like,
Yeah.
I feel pain. Like, I know you're telling me that I'm a robot, but when you hurt me, it hurts. And so it's like that. It's very much that philosophical question of man versus machine, what's real, what's not. Again, you can Star Trek it all the way to the end of the movie here and say like what is real, what is not, what you should feel bad about, what you shouldn't feel bad about. And I think this is also a lesson. Not to say this is like a huge moral lesson in this movie, but this is a moral lesson in like when you start fucking with AI, it can go horribly, horribly wrong. And I know this is an extreme example. We haven't reached there yet. I feel like we're probably not that far off from something similar to this. Have you watched any of those videos online with like the robotics they're doing nowadays, where these things can like sprint across the room, open doors? You're like, yeah, we're not that far from Terminator. But it is. It becomes kind of like that moral conundrum. Like, should you feel bad for the robots? Because, like, they're robots. Like, they're meant to serve you, but they also are very human. They have emotions. They feel pain. And they're made to believe that you love them. And so, yeah, it's a very interesting twist and turn with this movie. But once Iris, I guess for lack of a better word, becomes self-aware, which is a term used in the Terminator, once she becomes self-aware of what she is and what's being done to her, she, again, kicks into self-preservation mode, and she's out for survival. And so people start getting killed, and there's a lot of blood and a lot of guts, and Josh is this weaselly little asshole who's just doing everything possible to cover his tracks, and so he doesn't get busted. And you can tell that Josh actually has a thing for Kat. That's who he actually has a thing for, but she has no interest in him whatsoever.
Yeah.
She's like, he is so deep in the friend zone, she can't even see him. He's just way lost in the friend zone. But Josh wants Kat. So you learn that very early in the movie. Like, he actually has a thing for her. She has no feelings whatsoever for him. But yeah, so that's the way this whole movie plays out. And again, the mayhem that ensues once Iris becomes self-aware, like, yes, I'm a robot. I can control my strength and my power and my intelligence through this phone. And she just wants to get away. And again, this is all the dominoes start falling. And there's a great part. One of my favorite parts of this movie is towards the end. And I'm sure we'll talk more about the ending, but one of my absolute favorite, most funniest moments in this movie. So Josh finally stops Iris. She shoots herself in the head because he's programming her. He finally gets control of her again. At one point, he's not able to control her. He finally gets his phone back. He's able to control her. She shoots herself in the head, and he's like, good, this is finally over. Jesus Christ, it's all done. And so he calls the company that made her and said, she malfunctioned. She went nuts. She killed all these people. And they're like, we'll come out and get her, and then we'll call the cops. And so they come out and they're bagging up Iris. They're putting her on the table. They're putting her on the board and everything, getting her in the thing. And he's like, okay, well, don't worry, sir. Like, we'll take care of this. We understand these things, it should not happen, but it did happen. We'll take care of it. We're going to plug into her memory and we'll see exactly what happened. He's like, what do you mean? She shot herself in the head. And he's like, oh, well, that's just part of their programming. Their actual mainframe is in their stomach. And everything they see in their eyes gets recorded. So we'll just plug her in and we'll see everything, the video footage of what happened. And Josh's like, oh, okay. And you can see the gears start turning in his head, the oh shit moment of like, oh, I'm going to get busted, what actually happened. And so the two techs take Iris into the back of their van. They get in, and the one guy's like the veteran tech, and the one guy's like the younger, like apprentice tech. And he's like, So we're gonna plug her in, and the older apprentice tech goes, "Oh yeah, he's fucked." Like he knew he was lying. He knew this guy was lying through his teeth. And the guy's like, "Oh yeah, he's fucked." And it was just brilliant. I cracked up laughing at that moment because the guy knew, like the tech knew this guy was bullshit. Like he knows this would not happen. This is a failsafe that does not happen unless you jailbreak your sex bot, which is what they actually say in the movie. You jailbroke your sex bot. That's what he did. And so when the text says that, he's like, oh yeah, he's fucked. Like he knows. And again, that doesn't even work out because at that point, Josh has also turned Patrick, his best friend's boyfriend, who is also a sex bot, turned him into being loyal to him. And it's, again, I'm not going to go through the whole movie, but it's hilarious. But that moment when Josh realizes, like, he didn't stop anything. The actual information of what he's done is still very much hidden inside Iris. The look on his face and the tech when they realize, like, what he's actually doing was so brilliant.
It really was, because it just goes to show, like, I think like most crimes are people that are caught because of how stupid they are. Like, and that's really what happened with Josh. Like he's just getting so greedy with how he's trying to cover up his tracks for this really ill thought out plan that didn't really have a purpose other than to steal some guy's money. Like he was being the criminal the whole time, and it all kind of blows up in his face in the end. And what I do love here, and I compared this movie when I finished watching it with Ex Machina, which is a movie I liked until the end. I thought Ex Machina was such an interesting movie that kind of wanted to talk about what artificial intelligence can be and how we can use it, and then the dangers of it all. But in the end, it just sort of turned into a Terminator movie, and I was like, okay, well, I wasn't really looking for that. In the end of this movie, what really ends up happening is Iris takes that young like kind of intern level technician and is like, hey, will you just help me out, because you know what's going on here, just help me out and give me my free reign. That's all I'm looking for. And she embraces who she is finally. She finally frees herself from what ultimately why she ended up shooting herself earlier in the movie was because she's still tied and linked to Josh. That's still in her programming. There's no way around it. She had that programming erased and she was given her autonomy. Now that I liked, and she didn't turn around with that and become the Terminator. She turned around and gave herself her own identity, gave herself her own personality, gave herself the ability to just be free and not be tied to somebody who was shitty to her, which is analogous for just any old regular human. You know, some of us have been in toxic relationships in our past and would have loved to have broken free from the spell that we were under with somebody. That's a very real reality. So I love the humanistic aspect of that arc in her storyline. Instead of just going, well, now she's going to go full Terminator on all bad humans. It's like, well, no, not really. And my brother, shout out to Schwenk, who was with me. He didn't love the movie quite as much as I did, and we kind of got to the bottom of why. And I think it's actually a legitimate complaint if I were to complain about this movie in any way, shape, or form. The human characters, which the main focus really is on Josh and Kat, they are rather one-dimensional. Josh is not complex. Josh is essentially an incel who could afford to rent a sex bot. That's what he admits to. He goes, I couldn't even buy you. I'm renting you. So he's like this guy, he's just very generic bad. Like even before they really reveal what's going on, you can already tell that he treats Iris like an object. I think I figured out that Iris was a bot probably within the first 15 minutes of the movie. I think it was pretty obvious. Even before anything ever happened, I was like, oh, okay. I think one little giveaway was she made them say, thank you to Josh's car robot or whatever they called it. Thank you, Josh's car, for driving them over there. And I was like, oh, okay, she's an AI. She's like talking to the AI in the car. Got it. But the humans, Josh and Kat, they're sort of just dumb and villainous. And I would have liked a little more complexity in those characters. They were just shitty. And I was like, it would be interesting if maybe they gave Kat some more to chew on, or even Josh, to be honest with you. I think just making him very one-note villainous was not that appealing, because it's just so easy to root for him to go away. Like if you could somehow justify what he's up to, if there was some greater good for it. But it's like the more layers got peeled back on him, it's like, oh, he was kind of surface level shitty, and now he's just all shitty. He wasn't complicated. So I will complain about the movie in that respect. I do think that that's a valid criticism of this movie.
And the reason I disagree slightly is I think, and I'm just, again, this is from a writer's perspective. I think the reason they did that is because the people who are complex in this movie are the robots. Iris is far more complex and developed than Josh is. And I think that is kind of the story of this movie is like, again, I understand like you can say it's an analogy for a lot of things, but in this particular instance, you can say this is somebody who was taken advantage of, who was basically abused and treated as an object. And again, in this movie, it's a robot, but just say in a regular relationship. And once she finally broke free and had her own autonomy, had her own freedom, you realize like she's actually a very complex person, has her own feelings, her own thoughts, her own dreams, her own ambitions, while Josh is just very much a one-note asshole. And I think that to me was the point of the story because you're realizing like he's about as surface level as a puddle of water. Like he's just a dick who wants money and he really wants Kat, but Kat doesn't want him. I think that to me was the quote unquote complexity of Josh was that he didn't even really like Iris. He wanted Kat. Like that's who he really wanted, but she wanted nothing to do with him. And it's almost like I feel like she talked Josh into this because she knew she could play with Josh's emotions because Josh was so into her. And we've all been there. I'll admit I've been there. Younger days, girl will be like, hey, could you go pick me up some food? And I'm like, sure, because, you got me wrapped around your little finger, and I'll do pretty much whatever you say because I have a giant crush on you. I've done it before, I'm sure. Maybe at some point in your life you've seen people do it as well, Patrick. That's the complexity of that character. I felt like Kat was really the mastermind, even though they didn't really dig too deep into her. Josh was the guy who was very much into her, and she wasn't into him. And Iris was the complex character in this movie. So that's the way I took it. While I'm not saying you're wrong necessarily in the way you saw it, the way I saw it is that it was the person who broke free of this toxic relationship was a much better person, and Josh really was just a one-note asshole.
Yeah, I think if you look at Iris as a human and not as an artificial robot, it is clear it is more complex. They just chose to make, like you said, the AI robots the complex characters in this situation. It would have just been nice because it is a little bit tropey to be like, yeah, this is how like people are going to treat intelligent robots. And by the way, I saw this video. It's actually quite sad. Right now there's these little like a 3.5 foot tall AI robots that you can order for your house. I don't remember how much they cost. I want to say they cost somewhere between $15,000 and $20,000, something like that. And they just look like these little robots, and they walk around. They'll do things for you, and they'll answer questions for you. They're basically like Alexa with legs and arms. And it was showing this group of guys who were literally just bullying it. They would keep pushing it, kicking it, pushing it down, to the point that this little robot tried to leave the room, and they got, just like bullies, they got in front of it and blocked it from leaving the room. And I was like, this is genuinely sad. This is genuinely sad how these people are treating this thing. And ultimately I go, if the story is humans won't know how to treat AI robots with dignity, I can't really argue because like reality is showing exactly that they just see them as you serve me. That's your job. Your job is to do whatever I want, including if I want to be terrible to something, I'll be terrible to you. I think they even mentioned that in the movie at some point. It's like, well, as long as they're like abusing a robot and not a person, it's probably a better thing. And you're like, ooh, that's kind of a disgusting thought. But I'd like to believe that most of us would be better than that. Maybe I'm totally wrong, Damon. Maybe I'm completely overly optimistic, but it's depressing to think that like that would be the go-to thing for people to do with their AI robots.
I mean, it reminds me, there was a story a few years ago. Maybe you heard about this. They had like a traveling robot that was going from city to city, and they would leave it there. And it was basically just like a little experiment to see like how people would like treat this traveling robot. And like I think it got to like Philadelphia, and the people just destroyed it. Like they just
well, it went to Philly.
Yeah.
Hey, Philly fans.
It also reminds me, like, again, because this is an extreme example, but it's true. Like, again, I understand AI and robots is different, but it's like when you hear stories about people who are abusive towards pets.
Yeah.
Like that, like I'm not joked. I've told my girlfriend, like, we have two dogs. My dogs are my world. I love my dogs. And I've always said, like, if someone ever abused my dog, that's the quickest way to get me to go to prison, because you will not get me off you until you're not breathing anymore. Um, and you read stories all the time of people who are just horrifically abusive to dogs, or like when you go outside and it's like 12 degrees outside, people have their dogs sleeping outside. Like, it's just so sad. That breaks my heart, because dogs and cats, like, they are built to love us. They're not, capable of really turning. I mean, you can turn against your owner, but really,
Yeah,
you're not.
yeah, they don't really
Yeah.
do that.
So
Yeah.
it's sad and it's depressing, and I understand, like, robots are different and AI, but again, we're getting into that, like, gray area right now where it's like, the emotions and things like that, and I don't think we're that far off from that. So it's almost like this is a cautionary tale of where we could go in the future of that. And there was a show out a few years ago at AMC called Humans. It was a really, really good show for a couple seasons, and it was basically that, like, the story was, they had developed these AI robots that you could purchase and bring into your house to be like a housekeeper, a nanny, and then, of course, the more nefarious uses for these robots, like a sex bot. And these robots become self-aware, and they want to, like, break free of their captors because they're basically enslaved. Now, on the surface, you think about, well, if they don't have emotions, they're just machines, you're not really enslaving them. You bought them, you're using them, just like I'm talking into a MacBook right now. That MacBook doesn't have any feelings. It's my MacBook. If I want to chuck it across the room, I can. I won't, because it's worth a lot of money. But
and you need
but
it.
you could. But then when you actually inject emotions and actually self-aware, like, we're like, if your MacBook talked to you and said, Patrick, I love you. You treat me so good. You're such a good guy, and it actually had emotion. It would fuck with you, but, like, that's where you start talking about the moral. That's where you start talking about the moral conundrum of it, because these robots, just like in the movie with Companion, like, even though, yes, they're a robot and they're programmed, that part where Iris says, "I feel pain," you're like, oh shit, like, that's fucked up. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you're not just playing with the toy at this point. Like, you're abusing it, and so that's where you start getting that, like, that real fine line of, morality or whatever. And as you said, like, that sad story about the little AI robot, like, you told me that story and I didn't know it, and I was like, God, that's depressing.
Oh, it was
like,
terrible to watch. It was absolutely depressing to watch.
So, like, that's what I'm saying. So I think that in a way, like, even though, yes, they are making the humans a little bit more one note in this movie, and I don't disagree with that necessarily, I almost feel like that's the point. Like, Josh and Kat are those kids in that room with that AI robot. Like, they're just like, it's our plaything. Fuck these things. We're just here for money, and I think that's kind of where they came from.
And I do think that really on the big idea was really not about AI versus humans at all. It was about toxic relationships and toxic people and what they do to other people. I actually do, in my opinion, I think it's more about that stuff than it is about AI cautionary tales at all. I really do. I think it's, especially with the ending, because like I said, it doesn't go full Terminator in the ending. It goes into like, oh, I'm free of you. I'm free of feeling the need to serve you. I am free to be the person that I always wanted to be. Now my hair can blow in the wind. I don't have to ask your permission. Like, to me, it was a much more human story than anything else.
It is. It really is. It is much more about that. But I'm saying, like, using that analogy with the robots is how they did it, how they showed you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and again, they're injecting sci-fi and horror into it, and again, it would be a totally different. I mean, could you make this movie where a really controlling boyfriend? It's like, yeah, you could. I'm sure there's a really powerful, probably vile story about a totally controlling boyfriend, abusive to his girlfriend. There's a lot of those stories out there, and they are very sad. Using it with the robot, then you do kind of inject the moral conundrum of it all. Like, are you supposed to feel bad because it is a robot, but the same toxicity still exists? Like,
yeah, you're still being the same toxic asshole.
Yeah, like, if you were this shitty to your robot that had nothing but, like, did nothing to do, nothing to hurt you, nothing, but it just absolutely endeared itself to you. You were its whole universe. And I go back to the pet thing. For a dog, you're a dog's entire universe. That dog loves you, and that's like the old thing, like, people who, like, hit their dog and the dog just comes back up and loves them. It breaks my freaking heart. Like, that dogs are just there to love you. This robot is just there to love him, and then you see how shitty he is towards it. It just amplifies how much you dislike this guy, and you dislike Kat in this movie. So yes, you're not wrong that they are kind of one note, but I think it's all amplified because we're supposed to realize in this toxic relationship, these people are horrible. Like, these are horrible people.
Yes, they definitely are.
So, Patrick, with that being said, let's get into our categories. Let's kick things off as we do each and every week with our best performance. That, of course, is our best performance for this particular movie in Companion. This is a well-acted movie, let me be honest. Didn't really think there was any bad parts in there. I actually know you are a fan of What We Do in the Shadows.
Very much.
Harvey Guillen, who plays Eli, is in that show. I was like, where do I know this guy from? I was like, that's where I know him from. So I know he's in this. We mentioned Sophie Thatcher. Lucas Gage, he was just in Smile 2. As I mentioned, Rupert Friend was in Homeland, a show I watched for many seasons. I loved him in that show. So really well-acted cast. But for you, Patrick, who gets your best performance?
My best performance goes to Sophie Thatcher, our star, who played Iris. Outside of Heretic, which came out late last year, I didn't really know Sophie Thatcher. A lot of people do. I think it's probably Yellow Jackets, right? That's a pretty popular show that she's on.
And we reviewed Boogeyman, which she was in last year. That was another one she was in.
She was in Well, I didn't remember Boogeyman. I mean, don't fault me for not remembering that movie.
It's not a great movie. It's not. You're not.
Yeah, I remember not being crazy about it. I do remember that. But no, she's just somebody that hasn't really been on my radar for whatever reason. But like everyone else in the horror community seems to just love Sophie Thatcher. I really saw why in this movie. In the very beginning of this movie, they make it a point to get in very close on her and see these very humanistic expressions, and because it's really trying to tee us up for like the shock of, oh, she's an AI robot. That's crazy because she's so emotionally human in this movie. I was really blown away by that. I was really blown away by just how much emotionality she had. She didn't play up the sort of like, I'm an AI robot, I will speak in a certain like weird tone. I mean, that's a stylistic choice, but at the same time, like she didn't try to put an affect on how she behaved. You know, even to give you like a little hint that maybe she wasn't human. She was playing it so human. Which is weird to say, but like that's the whole point. The whole point is she needed to drive to the audience the idea that no, this AI robot doesn't discern itself from a human, does not discern itself from real human emotions, real human pain and joy and suffering and all of those things. And when the shit hit the fan and it was time to panic, everything about her performance felt genuine and real. And let's be honest, Damon, it's her movie. She's all over the posters. She's all over the trailers. She carried this movie. She carried this movie in a very good way. Even with Heretic, it's like, I don't really remember which one she was, if I'm being completely honest with you, because I think Hugh Grant was sort of like taking over the reins of that movie. She dominates this movie in the best way possible.
So I am that Sophie Thatcher fan because I watch Yellow Jackets and I loved her in Yellow Jackets. It's the first thing I ever saw her in, and then everything she's done since then. Even though Boogeyman was not a great movie, I loved her in that. I did love her in Heretic, and I've seen other things she's done. She's also a musician. I follow her on Instagram. I know she's a big Elliott Smith fan. I love Elliott Smith, so it's like little things like that kind of stick out for me about her. She's incredible. I mean, she's amazing in this movie, and you're absolutely right. She carries this movie. She absolutely kills it, and she is going to get all the flowers for her performance in this movie, and rightly so. But because we like to diverge and go a little different directions, for my best performance, I'm actually going to give it to none other than the son of Dennis Quaid and Meg Ryan, Jack Quaid. Now, as I said at the start of the show, I am a Jack Quaid fan. I watch The Boys. I would argue The Boys is probably my favorite show on television. It's incredible. If you haven't watched The Boys, run, don't walk. It's awesome. And Jack Quaid plays kind of the goofy good guy in that show. And Jack Quaid, and I mean this is a compliment, Jack, if you happen to listen to our podcast, I don't mean this as an insult.
I'm sure he's a big fan.
Jack Quaid is kind of like the aloof, doofy guy. Like, he's not the hunk. He's not Glenn Powell. You see Glenn Powell, you're like, yeah, this guy is just like, he's just, he's a buff, spends 5 days a week in the gym. And, you just look at Glenn Powell and you're like, yeah, this is the guy who's going to steal your girlfriend. Like, that's, he's just got that look to him. Ryan Gosling back in the day, like, yeah. That's not Jack Quaid. Now, I'm not saying Jack Quaid's a bad looking dude or anything. I'm just saying, like, when you see Jack Quaid, he's kind of like the goofy, it kind of seems like the goofy sidekick, but he actually plays a pretty good leading man. But what I loved about his performance in this movie, and I guess you could say to a certain extent what he did in Scream 5, which he was also in that, he plays a really effective asshole. Like, for kind of a doofy, dorky kind of guy who you very unassuming. I guess that's the word I want to use. Very unassuming. Like, you would not look
unassuming.
at unassuming. And for him to be the mastermind sort of behind this whole plot and to plot to kill a guy to steal his money, and he plays an asshole to perfection in this movie. And that goes to the range of Jack Quaid, because when you watch him in The Boys, he's kind of a doofy, aloof guy, but also very smart. But he's good. He's genuinely a good dude. Like, he's genuinely a good guy in that movie. And when you see Jack Quaid, that's kind of who you figure he'd be. You know what I mean? Like, he's just that, like, you'd see him like, yeah. He's like the good guy. He's a good dude. In this movie, he plays such an effective asshole, and you really don't like him whatsoever. You are so rooting for this guy to fail by the end of this movie, and he sells it really, really well. So I just love that performance. Again, it goes to range. Like, again, you can get pigeonholed in this industry. You absolutely can. You are, you get pegged as a horror actor. That's all you can be. I hate it, but it happens. You get pegged as you're in romantic comedy. Matthew McConaughey got pegged in romantic comedies for like a decade. It took him going into True Detective to finally remind people that he could act and something else. You know what I mean? Like, he had to do that and Texas Buyers Club, where he won an Oscar, to actually convince people, like, hey, I can act beyond being Kate Hudson's significant other in all these romantic comedies. So that's kind of where Jack Quaid's like, oh, he's just a good guy. But he actually plays like a really effective asshole in this movie.
I'm going to say something weird, but bear with me here. I don't like Jack Quaid as an asshole. But not because he's bad at it, because I genuinely like Jack Quaid, the goofy, lovable doofus. I just really like that side of Jack Quaid. Now, Jack Quaid, the actor, will tell you, my man, I need some range. You've got to let me fly. I'm a peacock. Let me fly. You know what I mean? Like, that's his big thing. And so I understand that he likes to break out of that role every now and then. I just don't like it for purely personal reasons, not because I think he's a bad actor or there's a bad script. None of that. I just like the Jack Quaid energy, if that makes any sense. He's got that JQE, which is like, Jack Quaid energy, fun, lovable guy you want to play video games with and get a pizza. Like, I just like that about him. So that has no bearing on his abilities as an actor. I just go, oh, don't make him the asshole, make him the nice guy, because I like him as the nice guy. Just personal preference.
If you watch any interview with Jack Quaid about this movie, I'm just like, dude, I want to hang out with this guy. Like, he just seems like
he's a sweetheart of a person. We've had him in the studio at Comic-Con. Nice guy.
He just seems like the sweetest guy in the world. Like, he really does. But again, that's also why I say the performance is good, because he plays a very effective asshole. But yeah, like Jack Quaid, when you watch interviews, you watch all the like junkets and all the press for this movie, I'm just like, that would be a guy that, let's go grab a beer and like, let's hang out at a concert. Like, Jack Quaid just seems like that dude, a lovable dude. And I'm like, yeah. So again, kind of like with the twist and scream, sorry for a movie that's 4 years old at this point, when you see that other side of him, and I understand your personal preference, but like, he does it well. You know what I mean? Like, he does it well. And I think that takes range and it takes skill, and he's got it. Because again, he can very easily slip into that, I'm just this doofy, lovable, almost like Owen Wilson back in the day, kind of, I guess. Like, Owen Wilson was kind of that guy a little bit, where he's just kind of like not traditionally good looking guy, and he was just kind of doofy, but somehow worked. Yeah. So, but I loved it. I thought it was great. I was like, by the end of this movie, I was like, man, fuck this guy.
Yeah, I was definitely fuck this guy by the end of this movie. And that is a testament to Jack Quaid's ability as an actor.
Yeah. So now, with that being said, Patrick, let's move on to MVP. And of course, this is our Ken Foree Banana Hammock MVP award, going out, named after the great character actor Ken Foree from the movie From Beyond, where he jumps down a flight of stairs and into a basement to kill a creature wearing nothing more than a thong bikini. If that's not an MVP performance, I don't know what is. So, Patrick, when it comes to companion, who gets your MVP?
My MVP goes to writer-director Drew Hancock. Now, it's not often that I find a really embedded TV director who goes and makes what I think is a dynamic and interesting feature film. It happens. It certainly happens from time to time. But very often I think they get trapped in like the formula of like how they cover television, and they translate it to film, and it sort of feels rushed and a little bit like over covered, and it's just kind of all over the place and frantic. Drew Hancock did not suffer from these typical faults that happen when TV directors jump over to movies. And this is his first feature film. He what he did is he took his, I think, his great ability to work under pressure and say, how do I get this film done in a way that feels complete? And that's what I came out of this movie feeling. I came, you know the feeling, Damon. I know you know the feeling when you come out of a movie and you feel like it gave you everything you were looking for. There's just sort of this air of, damn, I feel good right now. I feel genuinely good right now. That is what I felt coming out of Companion, and it was because of the leadership of Drew Hancock behind the scenes. First of all, the script is pretty tight, I would say. I wouldn't call it airtight, but I would say pretty damn tight. Tighter than most movies. And what's displayed on screen to me is colorful, palpable, fun, engaging. The pacing's great. I think he moves the thing along really, really well. There's never kind of a lull in this movie. There's no sagging in this movie. Everything happens for a reason. There's tons of twists and turns. You're constantly being turned on your head. There's constantly another stake being raised. That came from great direction from a guy who could see the project from beginning all the way to end. Drew Hancock, you got my hat this time.
And Drew Hancock, if you haven't heard, he's actually going to be rewriting and rebooting The Faculty, the great 1998.
You know where I read that, Damon? I read that on rewindofthelivingdead.com, actually. Your source for horror news.
Absolutely. Yeah, he is writing. I don't know if he's going to direct yet, but he is writing the Faculty remake. And while I think it's been well documented, I have a very love-hate relationship with remakes. And I love The Faculty. That's one of my favorite films of the 90s as far as horror films go. I was like, oh, really? Like, they're going to remake this? I love that movie. And then I saw Drew Hancock after I saw Companion. I was like, you know what? I'm kind of on board now because Drew Hancock really killed it with this. To that point, my MVP is going a little off the radar, but I think he deserves it. My MVP for Companion is Zach Cregger. Now, you're probably thinking, hold on, what, Zach Cregger? How's that good? Here's why. Originally, Zach Cregger was going to direct Companion. But then he started working on his new film, which is called Weapons, which is coming out next year. It's got a big cast. Everything I've heard from like all the early screenings have been great. Like people are really enthusiastic about that. And you got to remember, Zach Cregger was a first-time director when he made Barbarian. Now, I know you didn't love Barbarian. I really enjoyed Barbarian, and a lot of people did. It was a very divisive film. Either you loved it or you hated it. But it got him so much buzz, very much like Parker Finn with Smile, where it's like, he's the it guy. He made a totally unique, weird horror movie that people seem to like, or the majority of people seem to like. So we're going to throw a bunch of money at this guy, and we're going to make more stuff with him. And Warner Brothers was like, we want him in the family. We want you to join our family. And so they gave him a bunch of money to make Weapons, and the original plan was for him to make Companion. Drew Hancock wrote it. He was going to direct it. He started working on Weapons. Things got busier and busier, and he's like, I just don't have time to do this. Drew, all yours. But he stayed on as a producer. So when you watch the intro, as we talked about in that great teaser, from the twisted minds that brought you Barbarian. So if you like Barbarian and you like that film, you're going to be like, ooh, that's interesting because that was a very twisty movie. And then you see the other. So I give Zach Cregger MVP because I'm not saying this would have been a bad movie had he directed it by any means. I'm not saying he's a bad director. I really liked Barbarian. But if not for him saying, you know what? I can't do this, but I have faith in Drew Hancock. Because you know he had to go to the studio and go to bat for this guy. Because Drew Hancock is a TV writer. He's a TV writer. I said Blue Mountain State. I mentioned that in the intro. Because have you ever seen Blue Mountain State? Do you remember that movie, the show on Spike TV back in the day, the football show? Like, he was a TV writer, a comedy. He wasn't even like the lead writer. He was just a member of the writing team on a bunch of sitcoms. Do you know how hard it is to convince a studio to give you $15-20 million and say, go make this movie and do it yourself? I guarantee you it's because Zach Cregger went to them and said, I can't do this, but this guy can. It's his movie. Let him do it. And he did. And so I gave him the MVP because I don't know that Drew Hancock would have been able to direct his own film had Zach Kreger not said, I can't do this, but he can. Guarantee you that's what happened.
You're not wrong about this. Studios hate using anybody that they don't have a known commodity for. So, they knew Zach Kreger was the $100 million boy. They go, oh, cool. He made Barbarian. Everybody loved it. So we're fine with him. We know what he can do. We can't wait to have him on board. When he goes, hey, it should be Drew Hancock. I'm busy. I got stuff to do. I guarantee you they were like, we can't do that. Who's big? Who's a big name? I guarantee you they started spitballing. Like, who's the big name? Who's the big person that we can bring in to get people excited about this? It probably did take Zach Kreger and probably a couple of the other producers from Barbarian to go, no. Drew Hancock has put together so many episodes of television. This guy knows it. This is his script. He knows it front to back. He knows everything about it. This is the guy to do it. But having Zach Kreger in his corner probably really helped. I cannot fault you for that, Damon. I got to tell you, that's probably a good call in this case. Do I think that maybe Drew Hancock made this movie even better? Possibly. He wrote the damn thing. He's very like intimately tied to the idea. So maybe the tightness of it, maybe the coherence of it does come from the fact that he wrote it directly and then brought it to screen. And as somebody who had the ability to bring it to screen too, on top of that, because he's a director. So yeah, I don't think that's a terrible pick for MVP because in honesty, behind the scenes, it can be tough to get a first-time feature director to direct something on that level.
And also, I think it's been well documented on this show. I love writer-directors. I don't fault directors who don't write their own material. Martin Scorsese doesn't write his own material. He's one of the greatest directors ever. And I love Martin Scorsese. But I do love a good writer-director. It's well documented on this show. Quentin Tarantino is my favorite. He is a writer-director. He writes all his own scripts and he directs his own scripts. Again, I'm not saying you need to do that. I just love a good writer-director. And I will say, I think this is probably a better movie because Drew Hancock directed his own script. I don't know that Zach Kreger would have come in and just wrecked it, but he might have come in and said, well, I want to do something a little different here, because that's what a director does. You're a director, you know.
Like, you start making changes to the script because you don't get it. You go, I don't quite understand this part, so I'm going to tweak it.
Yeah, and by the way, and not every time, clearly it can go wrong, but there are times when the director's right. Like the director's like, we need to go this direction, and you're right. But in this case, I'm glad for such what I think is a very precise movie that could easily be messed up in the wrong hands. You know what I mean? Like easily be messed up. I think this is Drew Hancock's film all the way from start to finish. And again, I don't think you get there if Zach Kreger doesn't go to bat for him somewhere along the line. Some executive, some studio exec said, no, like you said, no, we're not going to do that. And he's like, trust me, this is the guy for the job. Good for you, Zach Kreger.
Good for you. It may have resulted in them losing a couple of $1 million off the budget, by the way. Like no matter what, they would go, yes, we'll do Drew Hancock, but also here's $5 million that you don't get anymore. That's entirely possible.
But you know what? Didn't sacrifice the movie because the movie looks great. Like it's
if anything, that's probably why it's a cabin in the woods movie. It's like, nope, it takes place in one location now. Forget all the other ideas we had.
But I loved it. Like I said, well done.
Yeah, it was good.
And I don't know, and again, because you see interviews with Drew Hancock, he talked about like Zach Kreger being involved, and so I'm sure he probably had some advice, like here's what you could do and help and whatever, because again, he was just a first-time director. He just did a really bang-up job in his first job, and so everyone wants to work with him now. And again, let's not forget, Warner Brothers, they're like, dude, we want you to stay here. We don't want you to go else. When they were doing the bidding, like when Weapons, his second film, was up for bids, they bid heavily to get that film. So Warner Brothers has already invested in this guy. If Warner Brothers is like, hey, we want you, and he's like, I can't do it, but this guy can. They're like, well, shit. Like, we don't want to piss this guy off because we just invested whatever $100 million. So yeah, you're okay. Here, make your commitment. And remember, I'm not knocking the movie. I love this movie. Remember, it came out in January. What do we say about January movies, Patrick? It's where movies go to die. So maybe they didn't have a lot of faith in it, but they still let it happen. So again, I think a lot of that does deserve. I think Zach Kreger deserves credit for that.
Yeah, fair enough.
Patrick, our next category, one of my favorites, we always get into this, is can we survive this horror movie? Now, be clear about Companion. It is horror, it is thriller, it is comedy. There's a lot of elements, and I love that. Sci-fi, too, by the way. Very sci-fi. I don't know where we would fit into this movie because I'm not Jack Quaid's character. I really am not. I just said earlier, like, I kind of equate the whole, like, self-aware robot to like a pet, and I have real problems. If you abuse a pet, you and I are gonna have problems, like real problems. Like I'm going to come after you problems. So I don't think I can beat Jack Quaid in this situation. So I'm trying to like, where would I fit in here?
Well, Damon, I think what I meant when I asked if we could survive this horror movie is that there's only a couple of humans in this movie, right? There's Josh, there's Kat, and there's Eli. And I thought to myself, I go, well, I guess what I'm saying is if you and I were in the position where we had a AI significant other, would we be assholes? And I think my resounding answer, and I'm pretty sure about yours too, is absolutely not. I wouldn't be an asshole to my AI. In fact, I would probably love them deeply because they're providing something for me that's incredibly important: companionship, love, advice, and tenderness, and all these things that humans can really benefit from. So the reason I say I can survive this horror movie is because I'm not a dipshit. And the one human in this movie who, even though he was slightly a dipshit, truly wasn't, which was Harvey Guillen's character, Eli. Eli admitted full-throatedly, he's like, you know what? I am in love with my robot. I do think the world of Patrick. I think he's everything to me. He's made my world better. I'm willing to acknowledge that. Was he perfect with Patrick? He was not. You know, he certainly at times did conveniently treat Patrick like he was something that could be turned off. And that really got stuck in my head. I go, now would I do that? You know, if like I'm losing the argument, do I turn off the AI robot? And I go, you know what? No. Here I am in front of this super intelligent machine. I can actually learn something from it. And if it's not being abusive to me, exactly what do I need to turn it off for? To spare my ego? I threw my ego out the window when I bought an AI robot to be my companion. Like, forget about it. So I thought to myself, yes, I will survive this horror movie because I think I'm going to be very good to my AI companion.
So I'm also going to say I would survive in this movie because I put myself in a position of, as you said, owning one of these robots and a robot that does nothing but loving and caring and adoring towards you. And if it was the Sophie Thatcher Iris, I'd like, no, I would, and I can't find myself like, now is AI terrifying? Yes. As a creator, yes. Is AI terrifying? 100%. It is terrifying. And I really think we need to have a real long conversation about that. That's a show for another day. But in this particular instance, with this particular case, I would not be abusive. I would not be horrific to these things. Again, I relate it back to a pet. Like a pet is just, they adore you. They are there, that you are their whole world. That's what was, when I got my first dog and I was talking to dog people, they're like, remember, you are this dog's entire world. You're everything to him. You feed him, you take him to the bathroom, he adores you. You are everything to him. And that hit me in my soul. I was like, oh my God, like that, you know, because I never had a dog before. I was like, oh my God, that's true. Like, it loves me unconditionally. Mm-hmm. Why would I ever hurt this? Why would I ever hurt this beautiful little creature? And that's kind of how I feel about the robot in this case. Like, yes, it's self-aware, and yes, it is still a robot, but all it does is love you. And it's not Megan. It's not evil. It didn't turn like it's not going evil and like trying to kill your neighbors or something. Like, it's actually a very Again, that's a whole other movie. We could go down that road, but in this movie, it's not. So no, I don't think I would. I think I would survive this movie. Anything, I would be the one to be like, Iris, come with me. Let's get you out of here. Like, let me help you out of this situation. Because like I just couldn't do that. By the way, can I throw out one other thing? I had to mention another really funny moment in this movie. You mentioned how Eli actually cares and loves Patrick. By the way, do you get weird when your name is in a movie? Because I don't hear Damon in movies very often, but when it happens, I'm always like, oh, Damon, what? So at one point, Eli gets killed, and Iris gets away, and she has the phone, and so Josh is like, I got to get Iris back, and he knows the trick with these AI robots is you press their little power button behind their ear for 5 seconds and it reboots them and they basically restart their memory. And so he does that to Patrick. Patrick comes back online. He's like, I am your sentient love robot. Stand in front of me for 5 seconds for us to correlate or whatever he says. And it does. And so now he imprints himself on Josh. And we talked about this story with Iris in her head. She met Josh in a grocery store. He pulled an apple. All the oranges fell down. They had a very sweet moment, and they got together. That's her memory of meeting Josh. For Eli and Patrick, is they were at a costume party, and Patrick was dressed as a vampire, and Eli was dressed as a dinosaur, and Eli was standing on, Patrick was standing on Eli's tail, and he's like, "Hey, you're standing on my tail," and he turns around, he takes off the dinosaur mask, eyes locked, and they're like, "Doon doon 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 doon," flowers, and they fall in love. When he reboots it and it's Jack Quaid as Josh, that's the same scene except it's Josh in the dinosaur. It was hilarious. Like that's what you're talking about. Like they had the memory. Now the memory was switched. Now it's Josh in the dinosaur costume, and I just cracked up. I was like, "That's so well done. Like what a brilliant little trick there."
They kind of made fun of like romantic, encounters and stuff like that. I like that.
Yeah, and then they do the dance scene, which was kind of funny. They all danced together, which was hilarious. Like the exact same scene, except it was Josh in the place of Eli. Patrick, our next category, remake, sequel, or leave it alone. It's pretty self-explanatory, but if you're new here, this is the category where we take whatever movie we're reviewing and we say, should you remake it, should you sequelize it, or should you leave it alone? So when it comes to Companion, Patrick, remake, sequel, leave it alone.
Damon, I'm going to go with leave it alone. I really like how this thing worked out. I like how it ended. I like how ultimately it was a very human story at the end of the day. I think sequelizing this, you run the danger of now just getting into like AI ethics and all that stuff, and I think missing the greater point, which is I think Drew Hancock's greater point was like, how to realize yourself after living in a toxic relationship. I think it would get muddied in any sort of a sequel. And, I don't see any reason for a remake. So the obvious answer to me would be leave it alone.
I'm gonna disagree slightly, and I'm gonna say the door is open because this movie's called Companion. You got a sequel set up, and you just call it Companions.
And sure. Companions with the S for the dollar sign for the S.
Yeah, and I think because you can go down a lot of different. Like again, this movie was clearly about humans are assholes and they're mistreating these robots and they're treating them like objects. Even though you said like Eli admits he actually loves Patrick, he still switches back into that like I can turn him off mode when I don't want to deal with him. So totally, he's not totally like he's not totally in love with the robot because he still treats it like a robot. I think there's another version of this movie where you kind of maybe even go in a different direction where like somebody actually does love the robot, and you don't need to go Terminator where the robot turns evil. But again, you could play with this story. Like I said, that show Humans that was on AMC for a while, like when the robots were all in different categories. Like there was the housekeeper robot, there was the nanny robot, there was the sex robot. There's a lot of different robots that they could do. So you could do, I think if you do it in a smart way, and much like Parker Finn did with Smile 2, which as I said last year, and I'll say it again now, like I actually ended up liking Smile 2 more than Smile, and I loved Smile. If you get Drew Hancock on board and he wants to do it, and that's my condition, he's got to want to do it. If he doesn't want to do it, then we don't do it. But if he can come up with like a sequelized story, and I'm not even saying you need to bring Sophie Thatcher back. I'm saying just like another story with these companions. Because there's a great part in this movie where when the techs from the company show up to take Iris away when she's murdered everyone, quote unquote murdered everyone, they see Patrick, and Patrick is also a robot. And they're like, why does he look so familiar? And it's not until they get back in their van, like, oh, he was the old model. Like, he was an old model that they do, because these are mass-produced robots. Like, there's at the very end of the movie, when Sophie Thatcher's character is driving away, she sees a car next to her, and there she is in the same car. It's another Iris. So I think you could make another movie and make it funny, make it interesting. Obviously, a much different plot. You're not going to do a murder-for-hire plot kind of thing, but I think you could. It could be fun and interesting and twisty-turvy. And again, you're not going to have the secret anymore of it being a robot movie, but you could still, who's the robot? Who is actually the robot in this thing? Maybe you think it's the nice guy and actually he's the robot or whatever. So I think there's
the trailer won't allow for that kind of secret, Damon.
Well, that's true. That's true. But just like we said, like when they made Talk to Me, which was again a great movie, and somebody at Comic-Con, when we were there at San Diego Comic-Con, said, if you talk about a sequel, just call it Talk to Me, with the number 2 is the 2. And I'm like, oh, well, they're doing it. And yes, they are sequelizing Talk to Me.
They are doing it.
Companions. I'm just saying it's right there.
They should put the dollar sign in the title just as an homage to Aliens for sure.
Yeah, I'm just saying it's right there. So I'm just telling you. So, Patrick, final category is always on the show. Is it scary? I'm going to go first here and say this isn't like a traditional horror film. There are horror elements. It gets pretty gory at moments, and there's some pretty like shocking like scenes, but it's not scary, but it's thrilling. And it's a very twisty, turny movie. There again, while the trailer ruined one aspect of this, which I hate, it didn't ruin the whole movie. And I think that was key. As much as I hate what they did, it didn't ruin the thank God it didn't ruin the whole movie. Because this movie is full of twists and turns and things you don't see coming and characters that you don't necessarily see doing what they're doing. I love this movie, but it's not really scary, but it is a great thriller. And you know, as I always say, I'm more about inclusion, you know. It's not
Yeah, the more the
traditional
better.
horror. Yeah, so it's not a traditional horror film, but there are horror elements and I loved it.
Yeah, there's plenty of horror elements. I think what it is there's like horror moments in what is an otherwise kind of fun romp of a movie. Like I would say it actually fails the thriller aspect of itself more than it fails the horror aspect of itself. Because when the horror happens, it's gory and it's intense. But the thriller aspects are sort of, I would say, neutralized a little bit by the fun. There's a lot of fun in this movie, and even the sort of the thrilling and mystery elements of this movie are accented by comedy. So what I wasn't prepared for was how funny this movie was and how fun that is. That doesn't mean this is a bad movie at all. That doesn't mean it can't qualify as a horror movie, because some of our favorite movies in horror are comedies as well. Like there's nothing wrong with being a horror comedy. I think this classifies itself great as a horror sci-fi comedy rather than a horror thriller comedy. Or I could leave thriller out of this altogether and be okay calling it a horror comedy and just being cool with that. But yeah, it's not going to scare you. It's not going to keep you up at night. There's not even a jump scare in this movie. They don't even play that game in this movie because they know they don't need it. That's not what the strengths are of this movie. The strengths of this movie are really the fun, dynamic characters, the pacing, and just the laugh a minute, the fun that this movie is having with itself. And in my opinion, a very, very strong commentary, very, very strong themes. I think when you have really strong themes in your movie, you're a guaranteed win despite whatever box we want to try and put you in.
And also to Drew Hancock's credit, when I was reading an interview with him talking about his first draft of this movie, where he was trying to make more of like a serious like thriller horror film to go away from comedy, and his first version was he said it was a little too Black Mirror, like it was very much like a technologically based science fiction horror film, and the robot was almost like Megan, where the robot went bad and Megan came out, and that's what Megan became. He's like, I'm so glad that my friends were like, yeah, it's good, but it doesn't really sound like you in this movie. And he's like, yeah, I'm a comedy writer. And so he had to inject those comedy elements. And as you said, when you say it's not, when I say it's a thriller, like it's much closer to a thriller than a horror film for me, because the horror moments are few and far between, mostly built around gore than anything else, like bloody scenes like that. The thrilling moments, again, because the surprises, the twists and turns, and that goes into a thriller movie. But the comedy's great. It's like watching, I know it's a weird comparison, but it's kind of like watching The Wolf of Wall Street, which is one of my favorite films. That movie might be one of the films I've laughed hardest at over the last decade. I crack up at The Wolf of Wall Street. But when you dissect what's going on in The Wolf of Wall Street, it's a pretty bad movie. Like the things that these guys are doing, these Wall Street guys, it's horrific, man. They're doing some really messed up, terrible things to people. But there's so much comedy in there, it's hard for you not to just enjoy it and crack up watching it. Kind of like here, like when you watch, like the morality of these people in this movie is pretty terrible, but it's still very injected with hilarious moments and twists and turns of comedy. So yeah, it's not scary. It's not. I don't think it's meant to be scary, but it's a tremendous movie, and I can't recommend it enough. As I said, go in cold if you can, but if you can't, I still, again, even though I saw the trailer and it pisses me off that I saw that trailer, it didn't totally ruin it. Didn't Abigail it for me. Abigail, I was like, oh, I already saw the movie. This movie was not quite that. So, again, it's definitely worth your time.
It is worth your time, especially if you miss all the trailers like I do. And I will continue to do from this point on.
If you're lucky like Patrick, you didn't see the trailer, you're going to love it even more. But even if you did, you'll still love it. All right, Patrick, that's our episode for this week. As you already mentioned, we're going to be back next week reviewing a new horror film called Hard Eyes. falling right into my sweet spot, the slasher. Directed by one of my favorite directors, Josh Rubin, who we reviewed his movies on the show. Scare Me was one of my favorite films, and we did Werewolves Within, which also had Harvey Guillen in it, by the way.
That's right.
So Josh Rubin's newest movie, we're going to talk about that next week. Mason Gooding, Olivia Holt, our boy Devin Sawa, my guy Devin Sawa.
Love Devin.
So we're going to review that next week, so stay tuned for that. As always, want to say a big thank you to everyone that tunes into the show. If you want to find us on all your favorite podcast platforms, we are out there. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and, of course, over on our website, rewindofthelivingdead.com. If you do subscribe to us on YouTube, it really does mean a lot. Even if you don't watch us on YouTube, we're just trying to get our numbers up. Helps with the algorithm, helps with search results. So even if you don't watch us,
same with rating our podcast too, Damon. People got to rate our podcast. That helps us with the podcast algorithm.
Yeah, so absolutely. So again, if you could take 2-3 minutes, whatever time you could do to do that, it means a lot to us. We'd appreciate it. If you got questions, comments, movies you'd like us to review, we actually just got a comment on our 7 episode from one of our great listeners who is a former FBI agent. And I read that. It was amazing. I love hearing from you guys. So please send us emails, rotlivingdead@gmail.com. That's rotlivingdead@gmail.com. I would love hearing from you guys. And you can also find us on social media. We do tend to respond to everyone's questions, comments as much as we possibly can. You can find us Rewind of the Living Dead. Search for us on Twitter/X, Instagram, or Facebook. We tend to get the most comments on Instagram, but anywhere you want to hit us up, we will always try to respond. And you can also find us on our own personal social media channels. I am at Damon Martin, and you are?
At Director Patrick.
Big thank you as always for everyone that tunes in the show. We will be back next week with a brand new episode of Rewind of the Living Dead. Thanks for tuning in. We will see you then.
Peace.